morning. Well, in the wake of the explosion of allegations against Harvey Weinstein and other business leaders across many sectors, the Me Too movement spread like wildfire. After decades of silence on the issue of sexual harassment in the workplace, women from all walks of life came forward to join the chorus of women saying, "Enough is enough." Time's Up was founded in January as a response to the Me Too movement and has since raised over $20 million for its legal defense fund and gathered over 200 volunteer lawyers to help women who have filed allegations. Sophia Bush was one of the 300 signatories on the organization's first open letter that stated in part, "The systemic gender inequality and imbalance of power in the workplace fosters an environment that is ripe for abuse and harassment against women." And for those companies who think that their policies and training programs that were in place before Me Too, that they were sufficient, it's time for a reality check. These movements have effectively put CEOs and business leaders on notice that the time is now to address these issues and eradicate sexual harassment in the workplace once and for all. So what can they do now, and how do we make the most of the momentum of this movement? That's what we'll try to answer today. So Sophia, I'll start with you. Many in the entertainment industry knew about this issue. You know, when the allegations about Harvey Weinstein came out, there were people that said, "We all effing knew." And if you're an actress, you've experienced this in one form or another. Women did speak out. Thandie Newton spoke out and was basically ignored. Some women were paid off or silenced. What was happening in Hollywood? Why is this happening now? And why is this moment different?
Well, I think that what's really important to remember is that we have a major lens on what's been happening in Hollywood because of the nature of the press and because of the nature of the entertainment industry. People know many of these actors and actresses who've made reports. They feel like they know us. They have versions of relationships with us in a way that they may not have with domestic workers, farm workers, women who work in hospitals or in the world of academia. But this happens to women everywhere. 78% of senior level women in tech, senior level women, not women in my age range, women who I look up to, have said that they've experienced harassment in the workplace. So I think we need to understand that Hollywood is a very public-facing microcosm for the issue. But in particular, I think what's interesting is that in systems where power is at play, where people are trying to break into competitive industries, or where there is any level of desperation because of economic inequality, because people need that job to feed their kids, pay their mortgage, which is really true of anybody in any industry, you have a culture where power can be manipulated. And I think that what happened this year, when allegations came to light about Harvey and so many women finally felt safe to speak up and to utter the phrase "Me Too," everyone looked around the room and realized that more of their friends than not were saying those two words, and they realized it isn't just me who went through this and was shamed, threatened, and further abused into being silent. It's literally happening everywhere, and everybody kind of knew, but it was vague. Now we have data, now we have facts, now we have numbers like 78% in certain industries. Now we understand that 1 in 4 women will be the victim of an attempted rape by the time she graduates college. And everybody understanding what it looks like in sharp specificness has said enough.
Yeah.
That's what I think about that, in case anybody was wondering.
Well, it's interesting that what you say about Hollywood being a microcosm. I was in Hollywood in the 90s and had numerous experiences, and then switched fields to find a friendlier to women field, and found the exact same thing happening in corporate America. So Susan, walk us through what it's been like in corporate America in terms of sexual harassment. How many women report? How many don't? What happens when you do? And do you expect the numbers to go up in the aftermath of Me Too?
Great question. So as Sophia was just saying, this problem is far more pervasive than people realize. So the numbers generally in corporate America was that 1 out of 3 women have experienced sexual harassment. And the problem is just about double that in tech. Women in tech report about 60% of women have been sexually harassed in tech industries. 90% of women in tech industries say that they have observed somebody being sexually harassed. Now, what Nancy was saying is that there's really no comparison between the extent of the problem and the extent of reporting. 71% of women who experience sexual harassment do not report it, and I think for reasons that we're going to be talking about a little bit later.
Can I just get a poll? How many in this room have either had an experience with harassment or have seen it or know someone who've had that experience?
Okay. Yeah.
That's like 90% of the
Yeah,
room.
there you go. It's like most of the room. Okay, so as Sophia was saying, the ACLU has a women's rights project, which we had since 1971 when it was founded by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So one of our current campaigns in connection with the Me Too movement is to try to dismantle sexual harassment. And we are focusing on low-income women. In the restaurant industry, the statistic is that 80% of women in the restaurant industry say they've been harassed. And 58% of hotel workers, women who are in low-income jobs. And so what we're doing at the ACLU is we're pushing, first of all, better laws. So in Chicago, they just passed a law with the wonderful name of Hands Off, Pants On, to try to protect women who are doing hotel work so they don't find themselves in the hotel room. And we're also really trying to push the idea that if you, as a woman, or anybody, doesn't have to be a woman who's subject to sexual harassment, but if you are a victim, that litigating is not really a highly successful thing to do. The statistics are actually a little hard to come by for a number of reasons, but one that I've read is that the percentage of litigation about sexual harassment that's successful is 2%. So what you can do is you can use the power of agencies. And the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has an excellent website where you can go to find out all sorts of things about how to report. So I think we're going to talk in more detail later about what a woman can do, or anybody who's been harassed can do, what steps to take, and also about what you can do if you don't think you're part of the problem.
We'll definitely get to that. But first I want to talk about, a lot has been said about the backlash to this movement. Lee Nin did a study in the wake of Me Too and found that over half, or it was about the number is half of men said that they were afraid to do work with women, that they might be less likely to sponsor or mentor. There were anecdotal reports of men saying that they have no intention of hiring women for open roles or managing women if they can avoid it. It seems a little bit like punishing the victim in this situation. I mean, just to be clear, sexual harassment is not a behavioral problem of all women. It is a behavioral problem of some men. And is it even legal for them now to turn and say, well, I can't work with women?
Well, I don't think that is legal. Sex discrimination in hiring is also against federal law, among other laws. And it seems to me that if a man takes that position, I don't want to hire a woman, so I'll never hear complaints, they're not just punishing the women, they're punishing their company. Because number one, all the studies show us that diversity in a company is good for business. You get more points of view, you're going to do better. Having women in higher leadership position in a company is going to improve your sexual harassment problems. The EEOC says lack of women in leadership positions is a risk factor for sexual harassment. You're subjecting the company to lawsuits, to expensive settlements. The latest thing is shareholder suits being brought for wasting corporate assets by having the public relations disaster too of a sexual harassment complaint. So I think that blaming the victims and trying to keep them out of the workplace is, I would fire the person who thought to do that.
Well, and that's from the legal side, which obviously I clearly agree with, but there's also ramifications of that kind of attitude on the creative side. So many of the people in this room work in industries that require creativity, that require thinking outside the box, and we're in a world in which we're gender split, correct? 50-50-ish, 49-51. When you take 50% of the information about the world out of your creative space, good luck on your next brainstorm, bros, because your next campaign is going to be one of the many that's hit the market that's been so tone deaf this year that massive corporations have wasted millions of dollars on ads that they have to pull in less than 24 hours in the cycle from which they're released. It's laughable to me. And when I've heard men in high-level positions, some of whom are people I know and respect, say, oh, well, I'd be nervous to hire a woman. I mean, am I allowed to compliment people? Am I allowed to hug people? I'm like, maybe ask. Shake someone's hand when you meet them. When you're excited to see someone you haven't seen in a while, hey, it's great to see you. Can I give you a hug? Not that complicated. And if you're one of the guys who literally thinks, I just can't hire women, look in the mirror, you're part of the problem. Because men who don't harass women aren't afraid to work with women. So if you're one of the men who like sits in your boardroom and is supposed to be listening to a high-level executive talk about something creative and you're fantasizing about her tits and ass, even if you don't say it out loud, deal with your own shit. Don't punish us. My mic almost flew off after that one.
Well, you know, the thing that women, one of the reasons women don't come forward or haven't come forward until now is retaliation and being basically pushed out of their industry. What's happening now in the case of Ashley Judd, where retaliation is very costly?
It's so wonderful because very often prosecuting these issues and going after these people who do threaten your livelihood in a court of law is very difficult. Ashley Judd filed a lawsuit against Harvey Weinstein, which is not solely based on the years of sexual harassment that she had to endure, but it's based on her economic loss. And she has the receipts. Peter Jackson has spoken publicly about how Ashley Judd had her pick of 2 roles in the Lord of the Rings franchise. And Harvey Weinstein then said, Ashley Judd is a nightmare, don't hire her. And Peter Jackson believed Harvey and didn't. So Ashley Judd lost out on not only the compensation of what her salary would have been for one of the greatest blockbuster trilogies of all time, but the potential loss of back-end points on that film. And she has the proof. There is a person coming to her defense, and not just a person, but a man who's being an excellent ally, may I point out, and saying, I did the thing where I believed the man, and I didn't do my research, and I didn't think about it when years later, Miramax hired Ashley over and over and over again. She clearly wasn't a nightmare. She just didn't want to have sex with someone who was disgusting. And she lost out on revenue and earnings that could potentially be in the multi-millions. And so if she wins this suit, it truly does set a precedent that retaliating against someone and damaging their earnings, damaging their place in their career, is quite the legal problem.
Well, there's another kind of retaliation too, which is that I think a lot of women are afraid that if you report somebody having sexually harassed you to HR, that you're going to be fired or demoted, or people will side with him and not her. So one of the things that I think as a lawyer is that one reason why Ashley Judd is doing so well is she has evidence. Peter Jackson is willing to come forward and say, yes, this happened. So number one advice to people who are in a company where you think things are going on, whether you feel like you're the target or the bystander, start documenting. Write down what's happened every single day, have a timeline. If there's any sort of, print out the emails, take a screenshot of the text.
And send those things in an email to someone.
Right.
So that you have a paper trail, you have a timestamp. You hear someone say something aside from being completely disgusting, let's be factual, also illegal.
Yeah, retaliation is illegal.
Send an email to someone who you trust and start that file going, because they will ask you if you have hard evidence.
And what else can companies do? Let's talk solutions. What can companies do to ameliorate this issue in their organizations, particularly, I hate to say it, in tech, which is experiencing a lot of this now? Over 60% of women in tech have reported being sexually harassed. What is Callisto, and how can that help?
All voices.
Callisto was the college
Callisto's
reporting
yours.
system.
That's yours. The other one's mine.
You talk about All Voices, and then Susan talk about Callisto.
Well, I'll introduce what Sophia is saying, because Sophia has a great program to try to make reporting better, which is step number one. And then I want to talk a little about prevention. But there's this program that's been used in colleges that allows anonymous reporting of sexual assault and harassment, which you're now picking up on.
Yes, so one of the things that we find is that there's a bit of a conundrum that people face, and women and men, by the way. We would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that men are also the victims of sexual harassment and harassment in the workplace. And reporting is often quite difficult. We hear horror stories of college campuses sweeping assaults under the rug because they're not great for their public-facing personas. We hear about HR really burying issues like this because, again, they're not great on reports to CEOs and shareholders. So something that I think comes out of anonymous college reporting, which we need, and also the clear need for a better system. There's a new company called All Voices, which is doing the work to create a separate, outside of the company system of reporting, so that somebody can report what's happening to them in the workplace. Reports are anonymous. They are verified by phone numbers so that they can't turn into what everyone will cry wolf about, a false accusation, not happening. and those things are encrypted so people are protected. But the idea is that they can aggregate data about companies and then show a company what sectors in their world are the problem. Because you want to take the conflict of interest of most HR departments out. And you can then, through a company like All Voices, create a database, and then your board is looking at this going, oh, it's really the worst in our PR department, or oh, this CFO is the problem, or oh, interesting that where we're seeing the most incidents is in this region, this vertical. And it forces people to have to do something.
And it shows patterns, right?
Yeah.
So if one person, I mean, my concern is that if you don't like the person you're working for, who happens to be male, you know, there are going to be people who abuse that system. But in this system, you can see patterns. If there are 4 people complaining about the same person, you've probably got a problem.
And then you know where there's smoke, there's fire.
But then the next step is to have those complaints taken seriously. So, you know, how many of you think your HR departments are lame, and even if they got the department, they would be ineffectual? So I think what has to happen is for either you have to have top-down change, like Blake Irving did at GoDaddy. He just changed the culture of the organization by doing an audit. And you have to tell people that you have to educate them about the problem. So the EEOC on their website also has great training programs, including bystander training, to, as we were saying before, to convince all the men, the silent majority who don't think there's a problem, to understand what feels like sexual harassment to women. So, you know, there's the training, and then there are also things that individual people can do just to change the culture itself, which I think a lot of that just begins with listening to your colleagues. There's a great website that was formed by women in tech after the Uber scandal just happened.
Susan
it's called
Fowler. Yep.
Better Brave, B-E-T-T-E-R, Brave, betterbrave.org, and it's incredible. It has advice for targets, advice for allies, and they can hook up people who are victims with a free lawyer for a consultation. They'll talk to you. So if you have any concerns either about the training or a particular problem, great place to go.
So what do you say, I want each of you to answer this question, to a 23-year-old woman who says, I'm going into the workforce, I'm concerned about being harassed, what do I do in the exact moment that it happens?
One of my favorite pieces of advice to give people, because it's quite simple, and we know we live in a culture where generally women have been taught to apologize for things we don't need to apologize for. Here's an instance where I think it works in our favor. I've been in rooms where someone will make an off-color remark or a guy will make an inappropriate joke and a bunch of other guys will laugh. And I'll just wait a beat and go, I'm sorry, maybe I missed something or I'm slow today. What did you mean by that? Could you explain the statement you just made? And the room goes quiet. And it's a really tactful way of, in the moment, shutting down an energy that, if not shut down, becomes a runaway train. And it's the kind of thing that women who are earlier in their careers, who are newer in the workplace, can still feel okay about stepping up and saying, where maybe you don't feel comfortable going, what you just said was technically against the law. You know, everybody has to kind of navigate at their own pace, but anybody has the right to ask someone for clarification, and when the clarification is inappropriate, everybody understands what that means.
I think that's great if you're as brave as Sophia and if you're comfortable speaking up in whatever way, non-aggressive way. I think what is even better is if a bystander, a man at the table, says, isn't this even better? I'm sorry, what did you just mean by what you just said to Sophia?
Yes.
Even
Yes,
better.
men in
So
the
I think,
room.
let's
Oh,
just
please.
change the culture, be allies, be part of the solution instead of part of the problem.
I recently spoke to a very well-known female executive in the banking industry, and I asked her the same question. She seems to have a lot of great answers to questions, and she said, first, just say something to the person. Hey, I love working with you, but that's not going to fly. And say something to the person that you report to, which is, we may want to keep an eye on this person. I don't want to get into the details, but it could be a liability for the organization. So you're not complaining, you're just advising, and you've made it clear, you've put that person on notice so that they have a chance to back off and not necessarily ruin their career.
Can I propose one more thing? Because we've been talking about individual companies, the CEO or the people at the company kind of looking around and finding allies and trying to change the culture. One of the most successful campaigns against sexual harassment recently is the Fair Food Program that the agricultural industry got together. It's the farmers, the farm workers, and the retail food companies who have all together created best practices and have vowed not to buy from farmers who don't actually adopt them and apply them. Could you have industry-wide best practices in tech? Okay? We need a tech solution to this problem, and we need for people to get together and change the culture.
And they've really solved their problem, really.
They really
It's
solved the
eradicated
problem.
sexual harassment. We could talk for an hour, but we're out of time. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you.